On the morning of February 25th, 1995, I received a phone call from the coroner's office in St. Louis, Missouri. The man on the other end confirmed my identity and, after apologizing about being the bearer of bad news, informed me that on the previous day my mother had jumped from the top of a 4-story parking garage to her death. The room began spinning, and I imagined over and over for weeks thereafter what the last moments of her life could have been like, and in dreams it was almost as if I was transported to the scene where she drew her last breath. Over the past 25 years, I've had a chance to think a great deal about my mother's death, the circumstances preceding it, how loving and innocent of an individual she was, and how much I selfishly took her presence in my life for granted. At the time, our family attributed her death to mental illness, even though the last time I saw her several months prior, she appeared to be her usual heartening and coherent self. She was the same mom that I always knew. I recall one day speeding up Highway 280 in California, taking my mother to my favorite restaurant in Palo Alto for lunch. She told me how the best song she'd heard in years was Tracy Chapman's Fast Car. And that was the story of her life then, a ticket to anywhere, to feel like she belonged, to be someone. I was giving her a ride to the bus station in San Jose. She was wearing a wig to disguise her appearance as she crouched down in front of the passenger seat, well, half laughing at me as I rolled my eyes and shook my head at her. And we spent our last moments together. And then my mother repeated the same mantra my father, her siblings, and I had become accustomed to hearing over the years. They're after me. Those people. No matter where I go, they always find me. At the time, my father and I lived on opposite sides of the country, me in California and Dad in upstate New York. My mother had 5 siblings scattered throughout the U.S. All of us took our turns trying to set Mom up with living accommodations and even attempting to find a job for her in her last years. She would be okay for a month or two. Then she would inevitably tell us how the people following her had caught up with her once again, and how they wouldn't let her be, and how she had to move on. It was a terrifying reality that only she was able to perceive. She claims it began with her employers at a nursing home where she worked as a nurse's aide, how she was privy to some sort of information she wasn't supposed to know. One night in the early 1990s, Mom called me in a panic from an apartment in upstate New York where she was living a few blocks from her sister. And she told me how she could hear people on the roof of her apartment, how they were following her, how much she feared for her life. And she went on like this for several years, fleeing from one place to another, becoming homeless and staying in shelters, then allowing for one of us to take her in. Then she would be on the run again. It all ended when I got the call that February morning. Over a decade after my mother's passing, while I was a professor at Florida Atlantic University, I came across the notion of organized gang-stalking and people that refer to themselves as targeted individuals. Slowly, I began to consider my mother's multi-year crisis and death in a different light. What if what she had repeatedly attested to for years was true? What if my dismissiveness of her plight drove her or contributed to driving her to take her own life? I delved into research on a topic that I could at the time scarcely come to grips with. It involved people who steadfastly believed they were at the center of a conspiracy, that they were enemies of the state. I would eventually reach out to numerous people who claimed to have been targeted and who shared their own nightmarish stories with me personally and on my podcast. I saw how easily their experiences could be categorized and dismissed as mental illness. Like my mother, apart from their seemingly incredible personal experiences, fear, and trauma, they were otherwise normal, everyday people. In other words, they were, in my view, neither suffering from clinical schizophrenia or paranoia.
Says he's found more than 300 victims locally and is tracking others across the state through billboards. In Johnson Valley, a Freedom House just opened to help people who believe they are being targeted.
To many of you who find yourselves the object of covert harassment, that there is hope and that you are not alone, and that we are striving to find legislation and we're working towards freedom for all.
Derek Robinson leads a national group called Freedom from Covert Harassment and Surveillance. He says he knows who's playing mind games.
Rogue government officials that are sponsoring this, also corrupt business officials, and private citizens.
And he also told us how.
Most of it is delivered by microwave, and I believe it's satellite delivered, whether someone is on a remote location using a laptop or next door using the desktop.
Bond says neurotransmitter chips that run off body electricity have been inserted into some people.
And they assign cell phone numbers to them. The cell phone numbers are then run through a computer, and a computer translates your thoughts. This crime has been available to the military for 60 years.
I discovered how gang stalking is not merely a topic for conspiracy bloggers. It's a real phenomenon that has developed a body of academic and law enforcement research literature. In 2009, the U.S. Department of Justice released a national crime victimization survey that focused specifically on stalking. The study found that in 2006, an estimated 5.9 million adult Americans were victims of stalking or harassment. Of these, over 500,000 victims were stalked by 3 or more people at a time, and close to this number reported being stalked or harassed for 5 or more years. Close to half of stalking victims report some use of electronic monitoring, such as computer spyware and audio-visual surveillance.
Our constitutional journey did not stop then, and it must not stop now, Judge. And we'll be faced with equally consequential decisions in the 21st century. Can a microscopic tag be implanted in a person's body to track his every movement? There's actual discussion about that. You will rule on that, mark my words, before your tenure is over. Can brain scans be used to determine whether a person is inclined toward criminality or violent behavior? You will rule on that.
In 2012, retired FBI Assistant Field Director Ted Gunderson testified that thousands of victims had been targeted by an illegal government rogue criminal enterprise that is active 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in the U.S. The program's operations, he continued, require extensive financing by illegal black operations such as narcotics and prostitution. There is a central command, he says, whose administrators can initiate surveillance, phone taps, and harassment on anyone in the country at any time. This makes the FBI's former COINTEL program, which I worked on, look like a Sunday school program by comparison. In 2013, CIA subcontractor Edward Snowden released thousands of classified documents that revealed an array of far-reaching global surveillance programs, many of which were run by the National Security Agency in coordination with major telecom companies and national governments.
People at NSA, analysts, can actually watch people's internet communications, watch them draft correspondence, and actually watch their thoughts form as they type. As you write a message, an analyst at the NSA or any other service out there that's using this kind of attack against people can actually see you write sentences and then backspace over your mistakes and then change the words and then kind of pause and think about what you wanted to say and then change it. And it's this extraordinary intrusion, not just into your communications, your finished messages, but your actual drafting process, into the way you think.
In late 2013, a young African-American attorney, Myron May, opened fire outside the Florida State University Library, injuring 3 people before he was shot dead by police. And so the popular adage goes that dead men tell no tales, but Mr. May left a 100-minute video-recorded testimony of the gang-stalking harassment that he was a victim of.
Talking about gang stalking in general, which is what a targeted individual experiences. The goal of gang stalking is literally to drive a targeted individual crazy. It's a very comprehensive program, and sadly it's a government program.
And there are the stories of thousands of other victims with similar experiences. The renowned Black author Gloria Naylor wrote an entire book detailing the stalking, harassment, and electronic surveillance she says that she endured in the early to mid-1990s, the same period my mother claims to have been pursued. As horrible as it was for me, Naylor writes, I couldn't help thinking about the horror for other victims, to have to keep these things to yourself because no one will believe you. I knew how lonely that could be. I knew what it was like to have dinner with friends and to talk about everything but what weighed heaviest on your heart. To visit family members and force yourself to be cheerful in order to protect them from sharing your pain. Gang stalking and smear campaigns are in many ways the opposite of each other, but seek to fulfill the same objectives. While gang stalking attacks the psyche, emotional condition, and overall behavior of the targeted individual, making them appear insane to their peers and family members, the smear campaign is waged to manipulate and redirect the emotions of the larger population against a specific target, often through erroneous information. I've often wondered what type of person would be involved in gang stalking, trying to drive people into such an acute desperation that they would go so far as to take their own lives. Who oversees it? And how could they ever do what they do day after day, week after week, as their livelihoods, without knowing how they're ruining the entire lives of individuals and their families, which is the stated objective. Now, with the declared COVID-19 global pandemic, the basic civil liberties and livelihoods of millions have been taken away. Entire populations have been, under penalty of law, imprisoned in our own homes through lockdown orders, forced to cover our faces in public and remain apart from one another, all in the name of public health safety. We have become, in short, an entire population of targeted individuals under perpetual scrutiny, made to fear what the future holds, emotionally and mentally debilitated, where despair is intended to be the new normal. If you like what we're doing in these videos, please consider becoming a Patreon of MHB at patreon.com/memoryhole. For memoryholeblog.org, this is James Tracy.